like like this point, let's say, was supposed to be under, like, can you like select this line, just kind of move it, and it will like kind of pull the whole thing? Like if you use the move tool in SketchUp, you know, it like pulls the whole surface with it and kind of readjusts it. Like, can it do that?
Yeah, you can
like a W6.
tab on the curves and select it, and then turn on X-ray. And you can get the individual points that you can then, you know, you get those crosshairs that pop up.
Yeah.
You can move it that way, and that will
Okay.
adjust it.
I can move it all the way.
This part isn't a very precise.
Good to know, because I was like worried. I was like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do, because nothing's like lining up. My curves just, I didn't measure like what was under it, like what was actually touching. I measured like to the
How good is your battery?
lowest point that I
The
could see.
OG battery, dude. I'd be impressed. Yeah.
I got the 3 on mine too.
Yeah, I stopped growing.
That is kind of scary. Like, wow, I have a ton to do. Awesome.
I'm mostly really excited because Sunday's really cool.
I didn't even know where Super Bowl was this year, honestly. It's like, when you said it earlier, I was like, oh, okay.
If they're intersected with one another, or
Good to know.
can you like see the points that are on one of these curves and then like visually like fix them if the surface is intersecting? Like by just moving the points around?
You can,
And then does that update the parameters that you originally entered?
not if they're from like the original code file, you'd have to do the adjusting there.
You have to do it all by entering the numbers.
Well, you can actually drag the points in the original curve file, and your parameters will be updating. And if you load up the properties and hit apply, you should enter in whatever dimensions you ended up with.
Right.
But if you're trying to do it all together, where you've got everything coming together with the surfaces, the only other way you can probably do it is if you tab over the edge curve, you can turn on like the X-ray view, and it should show you the points. But I don't think it's going to be updating the parameters unless we make an instance parameter. We'll get started here in a couple minutes. Today we only need to have a brand new conceptual masses open, so you don't have to worry about your form that you've been working with.
Oh, it looks cool. No, it's like all, it still looks like Roller Coaster Tycoon. I have that game. I mean, I've never played it, but I assume that's what you do. Make ridiculous roller coasters. I totally have that game. I see confusion. Peter would turn that into a board. He would find like a crypt. Be like, well, that lower level seems very crypt-like to me. Maybe there's this pool of death down there. Greg would turn it into a farm. A farm? Yeah. Greg likes farms. Fair.
It's like something Chris Garber made.
I think him to be very urban. That surprises me.
We're thinking of doing next business. So how big are you guys expecting to be able to book?
In fact, Greg
Chris
might
Bjorken.
be urban.
Brian Borges. Like it's like a novel, you know, like Stephen King is like a bigger.
As a co-author.
But he's very urban.
Doesn't have some more.
I'm saying, like, he very much likes to do and stuff like he's very much about
Carson, there's more important issues, like, do those start carryover, or do we start fresh?
I am thinking about making an entire
He seems like one of the people that
everybody's name, and And I completely get the judgment.
What are you gonna say?
Like his, like he.
One class today.
So it's the lab for computational practice, and this, I like to ask like rhetorical questions that I think that everybody kind of knows the answer to, and so whenever somebody sort of like, this is where we go next, they get a tally for a gold star, so Clint got 5.
Wait, you guys are the TAs or computational?
Me and Ryan.
Why'd you get five?
I'm supposed to be coaching
Yeah, get better.
after
What was that for?
When we get to wait for Chris to finish his work to talk about.
Oh, yeah, I think he slept like 2 hours this past week.
Man. When did you get your chili ingredients?
D-Day,
Is the meat sitting in your car?
decision day.
No, I'm getting me on the way home.
Are you lying?
Food line. No, it's getting around.
Man, we're gonna have a lot of teachers with a lot of free time once they all finish it.
I'm just kidding.
Now, do you think Jeff is like a typical?
You let me eat your chili before.
I don't get it.
He is a recent
If there was a hell for me,
Definitely bacon.
if there was a hell for me, now I'd be screwed.
If you talk about this, then it's worth it. You used to
Just for that win, no fun.
I'm not in there.
No hot
It's really
tub.
expensive food line, I'm not gonna.
Good, use beef. Or turkey.
All right, let's go ahead and get started.
It's not. I think it's two. It's not.
Hope you guys enjoyed your Thursday off.
It was lovely.
I enjoyed my trip. It was a quick one, but
You go skiing?
no, whenever I go out there, it's always for work, and I was basically there, did my ribbon cutting for the project, went out, had a couple drinks, got on the plane, came back.
Did you get an
Did
extra
you
large
get to
pair of
cut the
scissors?
ribbon?
I did not get the extra large pair. The president of the community college did. I got little ones. I got to keep the ribbon though, so that was cool.
But they already cut it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, well, apparently in the, especially in the public sector, you know, when you're doing work with higher education, like universities and so forth, it's really rare that the architects and the contractors all get to be part of those ceremonies. Usually we show up, but they kind of wave to us in the back. So this was actually apparently kind of a big deal that we actually got to get up there and cut the ribbon. But that was my first one I was really at, where I was actually able to cut the ribbon. So that's kind of nice. A lot of you have been asking me about your projects, whether or not you could start over on them and random things like that. I just wanted to kind of briefly talk about the way that the class is set up. Is that, you know, we basically have 2 parts. We're going to have a midterm and a final. And right now you're working up towards your midterm project. And if during this process you decide that you want to change something or, you know, revise, you know, a whole portion of your project, or even, you know, start over from scratch if you want to, you have that opportunity. It's not a problem. Basically what I was trying to do is get you guys, you know, start inputting this information, have something that you can actually work with. But ultimately when you get towards your midterm, you know, if there's, you know, changes that you want to make, go ahead and do that. It's not a problem. I'm not going to hold you to your original design, like your design has to match your analog model. It's kind of a process. So your analog model was the starting point. You tried this one particular method, and then in doing that you've learned some other ideas that you'd like to actually do or implement. So, you know, feel free to do that. And that'll be the case throughout the whole entire semester. You know, just be aware of obviously your time, and you know, you don't want to run out of time because you decided to rearrange everything. The midterm project will be kind of different iterations of your bridge component or your tower, whatever you're working with. So, you know, it's ultimately not going to look like your analog model in the end anyway, because of the different changes that we're going to be looking at doing. Today I want to get into the curtain panel family in Revit. It's a new template type that we haven't really gotten into yet. And this will start to mimic a lot of what you may have been doing with Grasshopper or in any kind of scripting, maybe even in Gary Technologies or Digital Project. Essentially, Revit has, within the conceptual mass environment, a lot of different tools of how to adapt a pattern to a divided surface, and then ways of working, with this pattern so we can change it parametrically. There are still a lot of tools that haven't been implemented into Revit for this particular purpose, and I'm hoping, as things develop, they'll start to implement it. Grasshopper has a whole array of tools and just ability to make these type of surfaces and randomize it, and even add in kind of all these nice sliders and adjust these parameters in various ways. Revit does not have the random number generator. I don't know why, because that's just built into Windows. So hopefully they'll get that formula in here. So there's not a whole lot of randomness that we can implement into these projects by the computer generating it, but there are methods that we can work with that might change, panel from panel. We can start to work with some computational formulas that we'll get into in the next couple classes, where we can start to really vary the curtain panel type from one little square to the other. I'm not sure how much of this type of stuff you guys have done before, but in a digital methods class or even fabrication class, you might have worked with the making of a component that's associated with an underlying grid. And that grid, as long as you stay within that grid and you work and snap to the different points on the grid and the reference lines, you're basically taking that grid and using that to divide up a larger surface that this thing gets applied to and replicated over it. As long as it hits all the points of the grid, you're usually going to have all your components meet up. So really the strategy is understanding how to work with the curtain panel, which is this pattern-based grid system, and working within that can then allow you to divide up your surface and then apply it to just anything, whether it's a complex form or a flat surface or even some sort of volumetric form. As long as you can divide it up into a grid structure, you can apply this pattern as long as the grids match up. And so today we're going to kind of go through a couple different exercises, not necessarily this one in particular, where we can start to understand how to get a surface to actually divide up, and then also work with these different pattern-based systems. If I click on this and I'm going to turn off the component, essentially that's all the underlying surface is, and this looks a lot like your bridges and towers that you've been working with. Basically any kind of underlying surface can be divided up like we did at the end of class last time. Got my little wheel spinning. I'm just going to turn on the grid. I'm not sure what's going on here. You will notice one of the items, okay, I've got both the grids. One of the items with working with this particular method is that we're going to be working with the one little component, and then when we try to apply it to our surface, you're going to want to have you're going to notice that there's some regeneration time that's going to occur as we start to apply them to more complex surfaces. And I'm not sure why it's just regenerating forever on the grid. I've turned off the component, but anyway, basically what we want to do is eventually just have kind of this test surface that might be a simple plane that we can quickly test out that our surface or a component is repeating over and over again, and then we can then test it on a larger complex surface. All right, this is should not be doing this. And you might crash your computer from time to time. I'll stop that. I'm going to just close out of this, and let's go ahead and start a new conceptual mass. And in the new conceptual mass, I'm just going to draw a rectangle. It'll just be flat. And we're going to create a form, create the solid form, and then extrude that. I'm going to take my extrusion down to maybe 1 inch. This will become our test surface that we're going to work with. Why didn't give me the options? And then under View, let's go ahead and go into our user interface and recent files. And we're going to open up a new family. And you should get the select a template file dialog box that pops up. And so far we've been working in the conceptual mass folder, and we've also worked with a generic model that's adaptive. One of the template types is the curtain panel pattern based. Don't get that confused with just the curtain wall panel, because you won't get the adaptive points that we need. So make sure you have that selected, and when you open it, you should have a grid system, and then you should have these points that are, when you hover over them, they're numbered 1, 2, 3, and 4.
You did that one more time, Jeremy. Sorry.
Just in the user interface, your recent files, you just want to open up a new family and curtain panel pattern based.
Sorry, thank you.
Now if you switch your windows at the very top, the switch windows icon, and switch back into the original family where we just had this surface. Let's go ahead and divide that surface. So as soon as you select it, you should get the divide surface icon that's available. And we can click on that, and by default, it'll divide a U grid of 12 and a V grid of 12. Now remember, at the end of class last time, once you select your grid, you have this pull down options in your properties where you can select other grid types, and by default it's set to no pattern, and so we just get the typical grid. But you can select something more like a rhomboid. You can also select triangle, flat, and change the grid types. The reason I'm showing you that is if you flip back into your curtain panel pattern based and also hover over the grid and click on it, you also have the same options off to the left. So you see how you've got the rectangle, the rhomboid, you can go up to no pattern. Actually, you have to have a pattern. But you have like the triangle bent, triangle flat, and all those other underlays that you had on the divide surface tool. So basically, these are the templates that you're going to work within in order to make this pattern. For now, let's just keep the rectangle pattern based. And we're going to just do something real simple first. It doesn't matter what the dimensions of this grid is, because if you remember, as you divide up the surface, you're basically dividing it by a number of U and V amounts. So your grid is constantly going to be changing. It might not necessarily be perfectly square. It might end up rectangular. The point of this is the corners of this grid are adaptive points that will stretch to the grid of a divided surface. So in this particular pattern, we're not going to be working with actual dimensions, but more like scalar percentages and so forth as we move forward. If you select this grid, I just want to show you the triangle bent. You'll notice that in this template, the reference lines, which are the green lines that make up this triangle, stretch over 2 panels of the grid system, of the underlying grid. That means that when you divide up a surface, this is also going to stretch over 2 grid points. So if you're trying to have a certain density of your shape, you may have to, when you start to use curtain panels that stretch over multiple grids, you may have to divide up your surface even more so that you can get a smaller scale, because this will actually be taking up two squares instead of just one. But you can also see you get an extra point on this particular one because it's a triangle bent. And again, these are your different adaptive points that are going to snap to the underlying grid on a divided surface. We're going to go back to just the rectangle. So you can click on it and click on rectangle. Now what I like to do, because you can do a lot of things on the curtain panel as long as it's flat. And if you're planning on using it on a flat surface, then pretty much anything that you do within this is going to work. As soon as you start to try to bend this over a complex surface, and you start doing offsets and all these other ideas to make a pattern in here, it might fail unless you take each one of these points. I'm just going to take one of these and let's drag it up, drag another one down, and basically make it so that nothing is parallel to the work plane. What this does is it allows you to, as we work, if something doesn't work as we're in this particular grid, if it doesn't work here, it's not going to work on a surface that's also bending. So you'll save yourself a lot of headaches if you automatically just drag your points up and down. Is everybody able to do that? And they should only be able to move up and down. You can't move them left and right. And you may get errors every now and then that says your line is slightly off axis. That just means you're really close to being parallel to another point. You can ignore the error. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I'm just going to create a pipe rail structure that goes around this. In order to make that happen, we need to work with our point element. So again, pick the point and just place it somewhere on one of these green reference lines. I'm going to also turn on my thin lines, or also known as turning off your line weights, just so I can see all this stuff a little bit more. And that same point that you just placed, I'm going to click on it and say show reference and always, so we can see that normal plane that's perpendicular to the reference line. I'm going to add one parameter. Let's just call it R. This will indicate the length of the radius. And I'll just type in 3 inches for now as the value. We're going to draw a circle that's associated with this plane. So again, if we pick the circle command, and then our placement plane needs to switch to, we need to say pick. So make sure you pull down your menu under the options bar and hit pick. We need to select that plane, and then go back and select our circle because it defaults back to that line. And if we snap to the point, we should be able to draw a circle. And you can just stretch it out as large as you can for now. I drew mine at like a 2-foot radius. And then click on that temporary dimension to make it permanent. So you get that little icon that you can click on. And then that allows you to select the dimension and then make that equal to the radius. Did everyone get that?
What did you click on again to make it permanent? I'm sorry.
Yeah. So whenever you have a temporary dimension, you'll notice whenever you click on something, you get the little dimension icon that's underneath the blue text. If you click on that, and then left click again off into kind of outer space, it'll make that permanent.
That's what I did.
Hey, Jeremy.
Yeah.
Do the line weight thing again.
The line weight tab is at the very top in your quick menu, and it's like three icons over. If you just click on that, that'll toggle your lines on and off.
How do we apply the parameter? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, and then once you have your permanent dimension, you just click on that dimension and then change your label to equal your parameter. And then your last step will be click on the circle and then control click on the reference lines. It should select all of them at once. And you can say create form, solid form. While everyone's catching up, I'm going to save mine. So do a save as family. And we can call this a curtain panel. Just call it a rectangle based, or rectangle for now. You want to always do a save as so that you can have a name that's associated with this component.
Sorry, can you get a pipe?
Just like this.
So if you have your circle and then your reference lines, if you just select your circle and then control, select your reference lines and then create form solid. Then you want to save it and give it a name. Back in the other file, I'm not sure exactly why it didn't create a, sometimes when you hit create form, it gives you those thumbnails that pop up that allow you to extrude it or make it a flat surface. And for some reason that didn't pop up. I'm just going to draw a line and say create form, and that will make just a plain surface. It'll actually go vertical, and that's okay.
What happened to the others?
I deleted it. I just want to have a single surface and not a solid, because it'll start to get confusing. Yeah, so basically, if you switch back into your other file, if you just draw a line, just make it straight, and then select that line and select create form, it should just extrude it up and it'll give it a default of like 10 feet or 50 feet, I guess. And then you can always select an edge and drag it up and down or change the dimensions. So I've got my surface like 150 feet tall. Dimension doesn't really matter too much. And then you can divide your surface again and just keep it the default to 12 by 12. So you should get this surface that looks like the Connect 4 grid, except for the circles. All right, so if you got your pattern created, let's flip back into that and we can select the load into project. And since we have the other one open, it will load into it. And you should just default back into your view. If not, you might have to click on your 3D view again. Does everyone get their item loaded? So once you've done that, you can select your grid that you've divided. And now when you go over to the left here under Properties and select the pull-down menu, look under Rectangle, and you should have a new item under there that should be named whatever you named your curtain panel. If you select that, basically that's how you apply this complex system of your square onto this square grid. So the more types that you have, or the different names that you have for each of your different shapes that you create, every time you load them into a project, you'll be able to select them under the different templates. So what that means is if you made a shape that was under the triangle flat template, you will have to look for it under here. It'll start to populate other additional names under there.
What's the difference between a flat and a bent and triangle patterns?
When we go back, let's go back into your grid system here. A flat only has 3 points, but it still spans over the 2 grids. And so when this gets applied to a surface, it's actually, even though this part of the grid and this one might be bending, it's actually going to just create a straight line. Whereas when you change it to bent, it gives you that additional point there that kinks it. All right. So let's work with, basically let's keep adding to this component. Now that you have it applied to one of your grid systems on the other project page, every time that we make an update to our family and load it into here, it should automatically then update this surface. Yes?
Sorry, I have an error. It says it can't make the type rectangle family.
Yeah. What?
I am, but I'm
One
like,
of these?
like I was trying to write and then I missed what he's saying.
Is that what that
Some
is?
kind of
That guy looks like this in there.
It shouldn't matter like how this is divided up and your surface was
So when I was looking for it, I was like, look over here, I was like, like I thought it would have. I was just I don't know if you're spending.
Yeah, I remember that. I did that last year.
You had,
That poor thing, I just.
It almost
It's like almost dead already, because I use this. And it works.
Generally, I think you see from the from the heart doctor.
So basically, when you're in this pattern, from time to time, you may want to drag your points up and down. And if you drag them up and down and everything still moves with it, then you know that it's going to be adapting to wherever you're applying it. If for some reason you get an error when you move this up and down and it says cannot make the particular component, most likely that is always due to a snap issue. So when we made this pipe, you wanted to really make sure that you snap to the center point of that actual point that was on the reference line. And that's going to be very important on everything that we do here. We have to really make sure we're snapping to all the points, because if you don't, then when it gets applied to another surface, it doesn't know what it should be referencing, and that's when you'll get the errors. And it'll want you to basically delete your component from the surface. So that's a good test for you to kind of move that up and down and see what kind of results you get. The next thing that I want to do is I'm going to change this to a wireframe. So down at the bottom in your views, you have this cube, the view display or visual style. By default, it was on hidden line. We go to wireframe. That allows us to really see all of our different components, and also allows us to snap to these components. I want to draw another reference line that's going to basically bisect or triangulate this square from one corner to the other. It doesn't matter which one. And you want to make sure it's a reference line. When we click on the different types, you have model lines and reference lines. And reference lines are basically, we went over this before, but they're components that allow other components to be associated with it. So when we put a point on a reference line, that point is always going to be associated with that reference line, and then we can move that point up and down the line. If we were just using model lines, they have no associations to one another. So in most of the cases for what we're doing in this pattern, we want to use everything in reference lines. Unless you're trying to make a solid, that's when we go to the model lines. So click on reference line, click on line. The last thing you want to really make sure is that you always have your 3D snapping selected. And then when you hover over your points, make sure the point snap, you should get the little pop-up menu or the highlight that says point. You want to make sure that that shows. So again, we can move our points up and down, and that reference line should also adjust with it. So the next thing I want to do is also make a pipe that's associated with this middle piece. So again, we have to put on a point element and turn on our plane and go through the same steps that we did before. And sometimes you may have to rotate around and then also tab to ensure that you get the point. You want to always be snapping to that point element. So when you tab over, it should go from, in this case I've got an end point and then a point icon to make my circle. And then we want that circle to also be the same radius. So we can just apply the parameter. So again, in the end, you should have something that looks like this, and we can load it in, do a save, and load it into our project. And when you do that, just overwrite the existing version and its parameters. Everyone get this part to work out? Yes.
Why is my line outside of? It's so weird. Like if I
It must be like
Somehow it's like offset one.
I don't know.
I didn't do it like anything.
And it didn't do it after you switched
No.
Did it just happen when you did this? Or did you happen to notice if you, when you did this rail, did it try to select everything? No? Yeah, I don't know. That's strange. Unless you somehow moved it within there. I don't know. Perhaps this
Last week?
one isn't associated with a point. Maybe it wasn't snapped to that point. But does it work when it comes to your other point?
Yeah.
That sounds like
That's
some
strange.
problems,
I
yeah.
don't
Yeah, it
know.
might have been.
You'll get some strange things from time to time, but
Is it okay to leave it or should I fix it?
Well, I'll take your
for now, it's fine, but you may want to fix it to make sure that it works.
Listen, I
And the only way to do that is to probably go through the steps
Let me
again.
required, tell me yes or no. And we'll-
Yeah.
that's right. Never.
Well, I mean, but like,
So I can verify that.
Way that.
more natural ventilation in that space is what you're saying. Or like diagonals outside. God, Kristen, you're so stupid. Obviously. You can fix it real quick. Well, can you just undo? You don't need to.
I might have just do it. It did take the 2 seconds.
We kind of optimize it for you. Yeah, nothing because y'all did the same thing. Before he had like, before he had the whole.
I mean, this stuff, like, will take
Culling
me a
it
while,
before
but
he
once
did
I
something
have so
else,
many
he had like
points
2
and
boxes.
stuff that, like, I don't have a little secret thing.
Yeah, like, I was like digging around with it. I wonder if there's any way that you can trim out like half the plugs that were too I spent so much time this summer trying to figure out this. He's like, I'm not the bricks.
Somehow,
Even that can like,
That's not
no, I've seen that.
Go back.
I failed so hard on that side. On any,
it was trying to override it.
I swear it was like,
Go back and forth. But it should.
it was like, you see now, like, you could write a script that would take that little binder clip, and then you could just
But you
like,
didn't apply your perimeter. Bravo.
yeah.
I bet you like. Something was wrong with it.
Okay, so now that we've got this, basically, at the very end points, what I want to do is create a sphere, kind of this knuckle connection. And drawing spheres within Revit in this conceptual mass environment is not obvious at all. And
Why would it be?
I don't know. Long time ago, I had to look it up, and luckily there's some person out there that actually posted online how to do this. It seems so simple, but I would never have thought of it myself. But essentially what we want to do is, again, change this back to wireframe. And at these endpoints, we're going to first draw a line, and it needs to be a model line. And we're going to draw this line on a vertical plane. So basically we need to pick one of these vertical planes on this endpoint. And then it'll draw straight up.
Does it matter which face we select?
It shouldn't matter, yeah, it doesn't matter what face, but we need to be on, try this again. getting my. Okay, make sure your 3D snapping is turned off, because then we actually get the coordinate snaps, kind of the ortho. So I can actually draw just a line, and you should be able to draw up. You see how you get the blue dashed line that says 90 degrees? We want to make sure we're 90. Then I'm going to take that line and I'm going to copy it. So there's a, under your modify, you have the copy tool. And I'm going to snap to the end point. And I'm copying it down back to the center, just so basically I've got an even line from one side to the other. Do I need to repeat that? Where's everyone stuck? Are you still stuck on drawing the line?
My 90 is going out. I can't get it to go up.
So the plane that I'm drawing on, so let's draw the line. You also want to make sure that I do a placement plane pick, and I'm picking one of the vertical faces of the point. And then I'm drawing from, and make sure 3D snapping is turned off. And then I'm snapping to that point and just drawing up. And it doesn't matter how far up you go, just to some distance. Okay, did everyone get that? Now take that same line, so if you left click on it, click on copy. You can also do CO, but it's easier just to hit the icon. Click on copy. And I'm taking the top endpoint and I'm copying it down to snap to the point, so that basically you have a line that goes up and down through that point. We're basically making an axis that we're going to revolve around.
Copy that to all the other joints.
Yeah, and unfortunately we can't copy it. Like if I try to copy this and snap to this point, it doesn't allow me to snap to another. So we actually have to repeat that for each of the knuckles.
How many quarters are you doing at?
Just the 4.
Okay, so
So if you can repeat those steps,
How did you copy that line?
you can't. You have to.
No, I mean the first.
Oh, the first one I just selected, and then under modify and copy, I took the top endpoint and then just copied it to. And if you're successful at doing that, when you hover over the line, it'll actually be one continuous line instead of just the 2. And the reason we can't just copy this from one to the other is that everything in this particular family has to be referenced to some point or reference line. And so we're always having to draw on that reference plane in order for these components to work. So that's why the kind of the tedious nature of it.
Should they be the same size lines?
Yeah, the lines actually don't matter. As long as they are well longer than what you want your sphere radius to be, they have to basically go past your dimension that you're going to work with.
Can you change the dimension of that line after you copy it and draw it?
Yeah, you can always select the line and then you get the drag tabs that you can move up and down if you want to. All right, I'm going to add another parameter. And this time I'll call it R capital S. This will be the radius of the sphere. And I'm going to make this a formula that basically makes the sphere always 2 times the radius of the pipe, so that we always ensure that it's much larger. Because we can change this radius at any moment later on, and we just want the spheres to always update. So I'm just going to type in R times 2. And this way, no matter what you change R to, that should always be, double that. And I also clicked on the lock. You get these little lock checkboxes off to the side. I don't think you really have to lock them, but I always do. I don't think anyone's ever really explained how those locks work. So the next step is we can zoom into one of our vertical lines that we've just created. And if you create a center end arc, we're basically going to make a half circle that is going to be on the same plane. I guess it really doesn't matter which plane, just one of the vertical planes. Again, I hate that it always goes back to the line, so we have to pick that center ends arc again. And then you're going to pick your center point as this point, and then we'll go up, and then you're just going to make an arc. See how I'm making the arc here? I just snapped again, and it starts.
Then you step back on the line.
Yeah, you just want to start and stop on the line. So I'm going to cancel again. I'm going to undo that and do that one more time for you. The center ends arc, I'm going to pick in these vertical planes. I'm going to select that center ends arc again. And the very first thing it's telling you to do down at the bottom, it says click to enter arc center. That's telling you what it's asking for. So the arc center is going to be that point. So you can tab over till you get the point. Then since we picked that plane, you can only draw up and down. I'm going to go up the line, left click, and then it'll ask you to pick the end point of the arc, so you should be able to rotate your mouse around. And then I'm going to stop at the bottom until I hit that line again. Everyone get that part? Now select the arc and make a permanent dimension out of it. So you got that temporary dimension, it'll be some whatever value, and you're going to make that equal to your RS. And these numbers are getting kind of big for me, so I'm going to change my scale from 1/8 to maybe 3/8. Looks a little better.
Much better.
Okay, the last step. Did everyone get this far? Okay, I'm going to do this, and obviously we have to repeat this 4 times, so if you miss it on this one, I'll continue. Just select the arc, and then Control select the vertical line, and then say create form. Unable to create element. Why?
Self-intersecting.
Oh, no.
Why are you so-
I can't even get to it. So what do you, just say, no, I'm just curious what you select to make the form. I thought you were confused, so you can start going on next.
Okay, so here's what you gotta do. Everyone should have gotten an error that's something about self-intersecting.
Yes.
That's because even though when you click on this line, it's actually still 2 lines, and for some reason Revit doesn't like that. So all I did was to do a workaround real quick, is I drew another line and I snapped to the endpoints. And then if you tab over that line, you should see where you can select the individual half, delete those, so that you basically have that long line again. Then it'll work. Basically what you have to do is select the half arc and the line and say create form, and it'll create your sphere.
Do you do that in each corner, or does it replicate to the matter?
Now you have to do it on each corner. Sorry. Luckily there's only 4 points. So if you can repeat that. You can kind of think of this like in, I don't know what type of Grasshopper experience you have, but in Grasshopper you'd have to script each of these corners as well. I guess you can copy.
This sort of reminds me more of GT than.
Yeah.
Oh, there are way too many things in this corner.
I need to tab over to something because it's not letting me select the single
Oh,
line.
no.
Are you hovering over it with your cursor and then tabbing?
Yeah. Oh, there we go. So you can see this.
All right, so let's spend hopefully just a couple minutes doing the all of these items.
There's too many things on this board.
If you guys are getting bogged down by all the elements that are on the screen,
What?
you can click on each individual element and the eyeglasses down at the bottom and say temporary hide element if you want to clear out some of the stuff. Just for a visual. So I'm selecting all these items and I just keep saying hide element.
Jim,
Yeah.
I can't get it, when I'm trying to redraw that line, I can't get it to snap to the lines that I already have.
Make sure you have, did you do 3D snapping?
Shoot, mine's not making a circle.
We're very proud of you, Brian.
So,
You're doing a great job.
This is frustrating. It's all maybe I'm trying to do it. Maybe I can see.
So are we getting this done, or?
What happens if you think it's extruding rather than rotating?
It's not one.
If it's extruding, you don't have your lines going past your arc.
That's what mine is
Okay.
doing.
Yeah, you need to make sure you're, okay. When you're extruding, when you're making your arc, let me pick a plane, and then I'm going to do the center point. If you're, before you do the extrusion, if your half circle and your line, if your line does not go well beyond your half circle, it's going to extrude this instead of make it a revolution. So take this line, click on it with modify tool. Click that line and we want to make sure, drag that blue line up, make it go past.
How come it didn't do that on the first one we did?
Because you probably had it past.
Well, but now you have to basically redraw the line. There's one line type of.
And as you make that sphere, that vertical line should disappear.
Well, is it what one? I know that if you drew the two little ones, then it would appear as well.
When it came up with the
Yeah, you have to draw a vertical line
Like adding over it.
that connected the end points of those two halves, then tab over your vertical line until you select each one of those halves and delete those kind of, I'm going to call those construction lines.
But it deletes the line.
Shouldn't. I'll be up there in a minute. Hold on.
So you're just saying we shouldn't draw all the way to the top of our lines?
Right. And if you've hidden your elements, like I did all these temporary hides, if you click on your eyeglasses, you can say reset temporary hide isolate, and it'll bring everything back. So anyway, you should have something that looks like this.
Yeah. Oh, well, I know. There's looks like it's extruded.
Also,
I
if you
guess
forget
that's what it looks
to,
like.
if you forget to set your parameters to your half circle before you made the sphere, and let's say you ended up with a 2-foot sphere instead of your 6 inches, you can always adjust. Let me go back to wireframe. If you select your sphere and turn on X-ray mode, and select the purple line, that will give you the ability to make any adjustments to that dimension if you need to. And when you're done, you just select it again and click X-ray off. Okay, I'm not going to worry about if you've made every sphere so far. We're going to keep going if we can. Go ahead and hit save and then load that into the project. And you should get something that actually looks like you have some sort of knuckle connection. And I might want to make that sphere a little bit bigger. It looks like in my parameters, I might change this to like 2.5. Just for visualization.
I understood now what's going on.
Hey, Jeremy,
Mhm.
like one of them would be on that intersection.
Except for like one of the sides.
Except for the sides, yeah, if you only made one, it would repeat over and over, but you would have one edge that wouldn't have it. So yeah, technically, we have, you know, doubles on each of the corners. But like your edge, you probably wouldn't have a couple of them, whether it's the right or the left.
I don't think my thing is gonna stay open.
Now I have lines coming across. Probably because you don't do, I don't understand, I have lines going everywhere. Is that, oh, that's.
All right, while you're in your test surface area, go into like an elevation view, maybe a north, doesn't really matter. And I'm just gonna make 2 splines. You're in the, just your test surface file where you've been applying the curtain panel to your straight surface. And I just made some splines. I want to make a complex surface. So in a 3D view, you can push them off to the side, select them, and loft them. You should know how to do that by now with your crazy bridges and towers. So to test that this pattern still works on any kind of surface, now that you've created your complex surface, you can do the same steps by dividing the surface. And you might adjust the U and the V grids.
So it doesn't matter if you don't.
They don't have to match.
Just 2%.
And then you can select that complex surface with the grid, and then select your curtain panel. And it's probably going to think for a minute. Should get a little regeneration tab or bar. It'll stay at 0 for a little bit, and it should start bumping up. It's got to calculate each one of your bends and your surfaces and so on. So it goes from like 2% to 100% right away. So if it works, you should be able to zoom in on it, and you can see your curtain panel being applied to this surface. This computer's working.
It's taking off. It's definitely taking off. I don't know, man.
5 years, 6 months.
It's bad.
What's on the show?
Look at all this.
So I don't know about you guys, but I've done this in Grasshopper before, and it took, to teach it, it took us like a couple weeks to go through all the scripting that you have to do just to make a pattern repeat over, over one of these surfaces. Although there aren't all the tools that are available, it does make for some quick structures that we can start to apply to any surface. And if it works on this flat surface and then you've tested it on this complex surface, it's going to work on anything that we can apply it to. Does everyone get their component to work out? Okay.
I don't get the, it doesn't give me the option to make it like a grid or anything. I click on it.
On your surface?
Can you choose the right one?
You know, Revit, it's kind of like lagging. I have like one It does pretty good. Like I was just if you're pushing, throw like just give a little gas, man. You know, it's like I'm driving right now.
From time to time, when you're working in the conceptual mass environment, if you notice your tools aren't popping up, such as the divide surface, even though you keep selecting the surface, it's possible that you might be in this 3D view, this like perspective view. Sometimes when you're in this camera view, a lot of the different modeling tools will not pop up. So if you don't see that happening, you're probably stuck in there. I always like to right click on that view and delete it, so you never have that issue, because that might be frustrating one night. The camera views we can set up later, and actually the camera views we'll set up in a project environment later on so that we can actually render these. So I would just delete it. Just make sure you always have the one that's in brackets. All right, we got a little bit of time left. We're going to go back to our curtain panel. And I want to go over how we can start to work with offsets. You know, a lot of what we like to do with these type of panels is create a solid surface in here that would eventually have a void that could grow and expand as an aperture, you know, based on different criteria or dimensions. Now, working with offsets, there is no offset on surface command, which would make this a lot easier. So we have to kind of mimic what that command would actually do. And to do this, we basically have to set up a couple more wireframes or reference lines. I'm going to turn on my wireframe. And actually, for right now, I'm going to select everything. So I'm back in the curtain panel family. I selected everything, and I'm going to click on this filter button that's up at the top.
Selecting the grid view.
Yeah. And I'm doing this because we've got a lot of components that we're working with, and I want to focus back in on just a set of reference lines and points. You'll see that it has all the categories that we've just selected. I want to keep my adaptive points. I'm going to turn off the dimensions. I don't need lines, other. I need my reference lines and reference points. And I don't really need the tile pattern grid. I'm going to hit OK. Once I do that, basically all that did was deselect all of those items that were in the filter. So the only thing that's there now is the adaptive points, reference lines, and reference points. Under the eyeglasses at the bottom, I'm going to click on Isolate Element. You should get this blue box around your view, and then you should be back down to just your reference points and the reference lines. All we did there was, you know, temporarily hide all that information so we don't get so mixed up with what we're clicking on. Huh?
Where was isolated?
So once you've got that filtered, do your, down at the bottom you've got sunglasses, and then you can pick Isolate Element. That'll be a tool that you'll use a lot, especially in 3D modeling, because you just have so much in your view from time to time that we need to isolate elements in order to work on them. Everybody get that? All right. So in order to actually make an offset on a surface, what we basically have to do is create some points, some reference points that can move up and down the reference lines. If you place a point element, go ahead and place a point element and make sure that you're snapping to any of these reference lines. Let's see, what do I need here? I need towards the basically all the angles of the triangle. I'm going to do a point element on each side. So basically each reference line on one of these should have 2 elements. Your points are not showing up. Turn on click on VG and annotation categories and make sure all of this stuff is checked. Do you have reference points checked?
Could be when you filter the selection, that you
Filter
filter
the
it out.
category maybe. Go back and reset your, go back to your sunglasses and say reset. Select everything again. Do your filter. You actually want to turn off everything else, but you want the adaptive points, the reference lines, and the reference points. Yeah, hit OK. And say isolate element. Okay. If you click on one of the points that you've just placed, doesn't matter which one, look off to the left. You have a set of parameters that are associated with it. This is probably all we're going to talk about today because this might be a headache. Is everyone paying attention here? This is important. You will see that when you click on one of these points, you have what's called a measurement type, and it's called normalized curve parameter. And underneath it, it says the normalized curve parameter is some decimal value. You'll say, in my case, I've got 0.224447. If you click on the measurement type and off into the right part of the space, you get a down arrow where you can select these other methods of measurement. We're not going to deal with these other methods at the moment, but basically what it does is, does anyone know what a normalized curve parameter is? So if you click on a non-normalized curve parameter, you see I get a value of like 2.69. And if I click on segment length, I get 2 foot 8 and 101/256 inches. So basically every reference line or every reference point that's on a line is some distance from the endpoint. The segment length, when I click on just that one reference line, that segment length happens to be like 12 feet. When I click on this point, it says that point is actually only 2 foot 8 and some fraction away from the endpoint. If I click on the other point, you see that if I also picked segment length, I am more like 8 foot 10 from the beginning.
How does it decide which point to measure from?
It's random.
Naturally.
It's actually the order. So if we hover over this point, it's 0.1, and this other one is 0.2. So it's going to be from start to finish.
Okay.
So when I click on that, the only problem with, it'd be real easy to actually pick another number, and I could actually say segment length and type in 4 feet, and my point will move along that line. But if we set our parameters to these particular lengths, let's say I want this point to always be 4 feet away from here, we run into trouble when we start to divide up a surface that we don't know what the end lengths are going to be of all the divided grids. And you could run into a situation where you've actually told the computer to move this point 4 feet away, but that line might only end up being 3 feet. And you'll get an error. So what I like to use is what's called a normalized curve parameter. If I go to a non-normalized, it basically takes it to takes your segment length to a decimal. So it took it to, I was at 4 feet, it took it to 4.0. If I normalize it, a normalize basically makes that into a decimal form that's going to be between 0 and 1. And so it now made that 0.332577. So it's basically a percentage along that line is that particular distance. So now if we work with what's called a normalized curve parameter, we're always going to have a value of 0 up to 1. And as long as your parameters that you input into the family type are between 0 and 1, you will never go out of bounds and cause an error. So we're obviously running out of time. I'm just going to add a parameter to both of these points and show you if I want all of these points to move up and down the lines in a particular, the similar percentage. I'm going to add 2 parameter types. Add a parameter, and I'll call this one just offset. And you want to make sure that it is going to be a number, not a length, not an integer. We want it to be a number so we can actually get the decimal forms. I'm going to create another parameter called, let's call it offset inverse. And again, it needs to be a number. If I type in on the offset, I'll just do like a 0.25. My inverse is going to be 1 minus offset. This will make sense in a minute. So basically, no matter what I change my offset dimension to, my offset inverse should also change so that both of these add up to equal 1. Now I'm going to click on one of these points, and if I look down at my normalized curve parameter, I see that this one is closer to 0. And if I click on this button, I'm going to make that one my offset, because that was the lower number. If I click on the other point, and I want to make sure that I've got it selected to normalized curve parameter, I see that that one's closer to 1. I'm going to make that one equal to my offset inverse. And I can do that on all of these. And see, this one's completely different because even though this one was closer to 1, so that doesn't make sense. Because this went to 4 to 1 and this one is the... So anyway, it doesn't matter. Just see what that normalized curve parameter is. And I'm just going to set them appropriately.
You select all the points at once and do it that way, or?
No, because you won't get the...
You're saying like all the ones that are like closer together, right? Instead of all those at once.
You could, but you don't get the value here to know.
So you gotta shoot in the dark.
Yeah. You'd probably save yourself time if you actually did it one by one. So anyway, I've got all those points now set. So if I change my offset, in this case I'll change it to something like 0.1 and hit apply. You see how all my points move closer to the end point. And if I change this to something like 0.4, they also move, and they're all moving equally. That's all we have time for today.
Can you move
Say-
them past, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Can you move them past like 0.5? Will they like switch sides?
Mine did, but I don't think it
I don't know
needed
if I've ever tried.
to. Mine did on accident.
No, they're not even moving.
See, why did I just do that?
Exception noise.
So because of my, just because of that offset, that formula that I typed in, it didn't want to cross sides. So save this, we're gonna build upon this in the next class. If you didn't get to this point, if you haven't added your points, go ahead and do that and add in those parameters I just did. Your assignment for Thursday is to take what we just did, and if you didn't complete what we did in class, make sure you complete it, and test it out on one of your complex surfaces on your model. So pick any one of the complex surfaces and see if it works. And if not, let's start to troubleshoot what some kind of what the different problems are that we might be encountering.
So just one surface.
Okay, that's it.
I wasn't able to get the ends for some reason. Whenever I was here, we was just doing a semi-circle, and then they created one direction.
Okay, so go through the steps again. What you want to really make sure is that your lines extend past your half circle that you created. If for some reason let's say you snap to the end point of your line, it thinks you want to like extrude that as a fork. But if it goes past it, it thinks that it's an axis and will revolve around.
So this has to go.
I think I'm gonna make it there tonight.
You gotta go make some chili. At least you don't have to present tomorrow.
Yeah, no, that's awesome.
You can make some chili.
Really good then.
Good.
Yeah?
Yeah, it went really well.
Glad to hear it.
Almost gave me like two ideas.
Oh, really? Oh, those eager bastards.
Dan, I'm stopping your thing for you, but I can't see. I'm trying. I can't.